You smile. You nod. You say, "It's fine," when it isn't. You hold the door open a little too long. You apologize when someone bumps into you. You stay up late helping someone else solve a problem you didn't create. And when they finally say thank you, you feel this hollow echo inside your chest instead of warmth. And you don't understand why. Because from the outside, you look like the good one, the reliable one, the one people call when everything falls apart. You are the person everyone leans on, and somehow, you have quietly become the person no one thinks to ask, "Are you okay?" But here's the truth that no one tells you. Your kindness is not always kindness. Sometimes not always, but sometimes it is armor. It is the most sophisticated, socially acceptable form of self-protection the human psyche has ever designed. And the fact that it looks like love, that it feels like love, that the world rewards it like love, that is exactly what makes it so difficult to see through. This is not an attack on who you are. This is an invitation to look deeper. Think about the last time you said yes when your entire body was screaming no. There was a moment, a split second before you answered. In that moment, something moved through you. A flicker of resistance. A small, honest voice that said, "I don't want to do this." And then, almost instantly, something louder took over. Something that calculated the consequences of saying no. Something that ran through every possible version of that conversation and decided that the discomfort of helping was smaller than the terror of disappointing. That calculation happened so fast, you barely noticed it. That is not generosity. That is social survival. And it has been running in the background of your life for a very long time. Psychologists call this pattern fawn response, a term introduced by therapist Pete Walker to describe a fourth trauma response alongside fight, flight, and freeze. When a person grows up in an environment where love felt conditional, where approval was something that had to be earned rather than freely given, the nervous system learns a very specific lesson. It learns that being agreeable, being useful, being endlessly accommodating, keeps you safe. Being difficult, having needs, taking up space, brings consequences. And so the child you, at some earlier, smaller version of yourself, built a strategy, an emotional architecture so elegant, so functional, so socially praised, that you carried it all the way into adulthood without ever questioning whether you still needed it. You were not born a people pleaser. You were trained into it by an environment that rewarded your softness and punished your edges. Maybe it was a parent whose love had conditions attached, whose warmth appeared when you were good and disappeared when you were difficult. Maybe it was a home where conflict was dangerous, where someone else's anger made the walls shake, and your stillness, your compliance, your endless peacemaking was the only thing that kept things from breaking apart. Maybe it was subtler than that. Maybe you were just the sensitive one in a family that did not know what to do with sensitivity, so you learned to make yourself smaller, easier, less of a burden. Whatever the specific shape of it, the root is always the same. Love felt like something you had to perform in order to receive. And you were very, very good at the performance. Jung called this the development of the persona, the mask we construct to navigate the social world. For you, that persona was built around helpfulness, around warmth, around being the person who never causes problems, who always has bandwidth, who makes everyone around them feel comfortable at the quiet, uncounted expense of themselves. And here is what Jung also said, which is the part that changes everything. The stronger the persona, the more violently it suppresses the shadow. Your shadow is not your darkness. It is your truth. Every part of you that you learned was not acceptable. Your anger, your needs, your exhaustion, your desire to be chosen first for once did not disappear when you suppressed it. It went underground. It pulled beneath the surface of your beautiful, generous exterior, and it has been building pressure ever since. This is why you sometimes feel an irrational flash of resentment toward the people you love most. Not because you are a bad person, but because you have been quietly keeping a ledger, not consciously, not intentionally, but emotionally. Your nervous system has been tracking every moment your needs were set aside for someone else. This is why you feel exhausted in ways that sleep cannot fix. This is why you sometimes look at your own life, a life that looks generous and warm and connected from the outside, and feel estranged, Quiet loneliness that you cannot explain to anyone, because how do you tell the people you have given everything to that you feel unseen? You cannot. Because your entire armor was built around never being a burden. Part 2. The manipulation you did not know you were doing this is the harder truth. The one that requires you to stay with the discomfort for a moment, instead of clicking away. Your kindness gives you control, not in a sinister way, not in the way of someone who schemes and plots, but in a very real, very human way. When you are the one who gives, you are never in the vulnerable position of the one who needs. When you are the helper, you hold a kind of social power that feels safe. People need you, people appreciate you, and as long as they need you, they cannot leave you. Psychologists describe this as a form of relational currency management. You have unconsciously learned that helpfulness buys belonging, that generosity purchases loyalty, that if you make yourself indispensable enough, the abandonment you fear at your core becomes statistically less likely. This is not manipulation in the way the word usually lands. This is inner chaos finding the cleverest possible disguise. But consider what it costs the people around you. When you never show your needs, you do not give the people who love you the opportunity to show up for you. You are without meaning to robbing them of the intimacy of reciprocity. You are holding the relationship in a particular shape, one where you give and they receive, and calling that love when really is a controlled distance wearing the costume of closeness. The philosopher Martin Buber spoke about the difference between an I-it relationship and an I-thou relationship. In an I-it relationship, the other person is a function, someone to be helped, managed, maintained. In an I-thou relationship, both people are fully present, fully seen, fully human in their needs and their limitations. Your kindness, when it is armor, creates I-it relationships while craving I-thou ones. And then you wonder why you feel alone in rooms full of people who love you. Part 3. The identity you built around being good here is a question that might land strangely. What would happen to your sense of self if you stopped being the kind one? Because at some point, and this is the subtle genius of the persona, being kind stopped being something you do and became something you are. It became load-bearing. If you are not the generous one, the reliable one, the one who holds everything together, who are you? This is the existential terror underneath the pattern. This is what makes it so resistant to change. It is not just a habit. It is an identity, and the ego does not give up identity quietly. Nietzsche wrote about the concept of resentment, a specific kind of suppressed resentment that occurs when a person or group feels powerless to act on their desires, and instead reframes their constraints as moral virtue. The person who cannot say no begins to believe that saying no is wrong. The person who has suppressed their own needs for so long begins to experience neediness in others as weakness or selfishness. The inability becomes a philosophy. You have watched this in yourself, perhaps. The flash of judgment when someone else sets a boundary you would never allow yourself to set. The complicated feeling when a friend cancels plans without apologizing. The way other people's ability to simply want things, simply ask for things, simply take up space makes you feel something that sits uncomfortably between admiration and contempt. That discomfort is not a character flaw. It is a map. It is pointing directly at the parts of yourself you have not yet been allowed to reclaim. Part 4. What real kindness actually looks like. True kindness does not bleed. It does not resent. It does not keep a quiet ledger of sacrifice. Real kindness comes from abundance, from a person who knows their own needs, honors them, and then genuinely, freely, without invisible expectation, chooses to give. It is not compulsive. It is not anxious. It does not break into resentment when it is not reciprocated, because it was never transactional to begin with. The difference between these two kinds of giving is not visible from the outside. Both people open the door for the stranger. Both people sit with the grieving friend. Both people say yes to the request. But one of them goes home feeling full, and the other goes home feeling empty, and confused about why, and guilty about the confusion. The world calls both of them kind. Only one of them is free. There is a concept in acceptance and commitment therapy called values-based action, the idea that behavior becomes sustainable and nourishing only when it flows from your genuine values, rather than from anxiety or avoidance. When your giving flows from fear of abandonment, it is not values-based. It is fear-based, and fear-based giving will always deplete you, because there is no floor to fear. It cannot be satisfied. The more you give from that place, the more that place demands. Your nervous system was not designed to run on chronic appeasement. Part 5. The grief of seeing clearly. When this realization lands, and it will land differently for different people, there is often a grief that comes with it. Because if your kindness has sometimes been armor, then what does that mean about your relationships? Were they real? Were you real? Were the people who loved your warmth loving you, or loving what you provided? Stay with that. Do not rush past it. The answer is that both things can be true simultaneously. You can have given genuinely while also giving compulsively. The warmth was real. The care was real. The connection was real. And it was also underneath, partially, in ways you were not conscious of, driven by a small, frightened part of you that learned long ago that love had to be earned through usefulness. This does not erase the love. It complicates it. And complexity is where real understanding lives. Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because complete self-acceptance means accepting not just the generous, warm, giving version of you, but also the part that is tired, the part that is angry, the part that wants to be chosen without having to earn it, the part that is not always kind, not always patient, not always giving, the part that is, underneath all the armor, simply human. The realization you did not become this way because something is wrong with you. You became this way because something was right with you. Your sensitivity, your attunement to other people's emotions, your ability to read a room and understand what it needed, and those gifts were handed to a child who had to use them for survival instead of joy. The question now is not, how do I stop being kind? The question is whether your kindness can begin to include yourself. Whether the same compassion you extend to every struggling person in your life can be turned just slightly, just experimentally inward. Whether you can begin to notice the split second before you say yes and ask, is this coming from love or from fear? Is this giving or is this protecting? Is this kindness or is this armor? You do not have to answer that question perfectly. You do not have to overhaul your personality or become someone who is suddenly comfortable with conflict and indifferent to other people's pain. That is not the goal. The goal is radical understanding, not self-improvement, but self-sight. The mask is not your enemy. It kept you safe when safety was not guaranteed. The only question is whether you still need it the way you once did. Because you are not that child anymore. You are someone who has survived enough to be reading this. To be sitting with this discomfort, instead of scrolling past it. To be willing, even for a moment, to look at the gap between who the world sees and who you know yourself to be in the quietest hours. That willingness is not weakness. That willingness is the bravest thing a person can do. And it is the beginning, not the end, not the solution, but the beginning of a kindness that does not cost you yourself. There is a version of you on the other side of this understanding who is still warm, still generous, still the person people call when things fall apart. But that version of you also has a voice that sometimes says no. That version of you receives as fluidly as they give. That version of you does not lie awake wondering if people would still love them if they stopped being useful. That version of you is not a fantasy. It is not a different person. It is you before the armor, before the survival strategy, before you learned that love was something to be earned. It is you, finally, being as kind to yourself as you have always been to everyone else. So here is the question to carry with you, not to answer immediately, but to hold. Which truth landed the hardest just now? Was it the realization that your kindness has sometimes been fear wearing a beautiful disguise? Was it the loneliness of being surrounded by people who need you, but do not truly see you? Or was it the moment you recognize that the judgment you feel toward people who take up space is really grief for the space you were never allowed to take? Sit with whichever one made you pause. Because that pause, that small, uncomfortable, clarifying pause, is not anxiety. That is you, knowing yourself.